The mother and daughter were eating rotten apples near his warehouse when he took off his coat and said, "Come inside." He didn't know their names. He didn't ask. It was near dusk, and the desert wind was blowing fine sand into every crevice of the broken stone walls behind them. The woman's dupatta was torn at the edge, and she used it to shade her child's eyes from the sun as the little girl gnawed on a brown, sour apple like it was treasure. He had only come out to throw the bones of his dinner to the dogs, but what he saw wasn't something he could walk past. Her hands were trembling, but not from fear. Hunger makes hands behave like that. The girl, barely 6, had the kind of silence only orphaned children carry in their gaze. Not a tear, not a sound, just acceptance. The kind that crushes a man's chest if he stares too long. He threw his coat over the woman's shoulders. She flinched. Her first instinct was to recoil, protect her daughter. But then the warmth of the coat settled over her thin bones and her lips parted, just slightly, with disbelief. His voice came quiet, steady. "Come inside." The villagers would talk. They always did. In that part of the world, a man couldn't offer a shadow to a stranger without becoming part of her shame. But he didn't care. Not after what he had seen done to women like her. Not after what he had failed to stop before. Her name was Noor Bano. She hadn't spoken it aloud in weeks, not since the night her husband was dragged into the desert by his own cousins, tied to the back of a camel, and left for the jackals. All because he refused to sell their land. Her baby girl had cried until her voice broke. Noor had buried her husband's shoes under a neem tree with her own hands. There was no body left to bury. Only a handful of his hair the vultures didn't want. The man, his name was Dodd, let them into his warehouse, which was nothing more than a large mud-brick room with burlap sacks of grain and some rusted tools. He gave them a corner, a blanket, and water. That was it. But for Noor, it was more than her brothers had ever offered. They stayed 3 nights in silence. Noor cleaned the floor with her own dupatta. Her daughter, Zora, began to sleep without whimpering. But the village had already begun to whisper. The boy at the tandoor smirked when Daud passed by. An old woman muttered curses under her breath. A man spit on the ground where Noor had walked, and on the 4th night, her brother came. Ramat Gul was not a brother by heart, only by blood. He had sold their father's land without asking her. He had drunk away the share meant for her wedding. And now, with her husband gone, he saw her as nothing but a stain on his so-called honor. He came to the warehouse shouting, "Baji, you shame our blood by sitting under a strange man's roof? Come home or I'll drag you by your hair." Dodd stepped between them. "She's here with my permission," he said. Ramat laughed. "Who are you, her savior, this widow's protector, or is she already warming your bed at night?" Noor's eyes filled, not with tears, but with the rage of a woman who has been humiliated too many times. Before she could speak, Dodd slapped Ramat across the face. The sound echoed off the warehouse walls like a gunshot. Ramat stumbled back, holding his jaw. He stared, wide-eyed, not just at Daud, but at Noor, as if her defiance was the bigger betrayal. "You've made an enemy," Ramat spat. "You'll both pay." And he left. That night Noor didn't sleep. She sat by her daughter, watching, her chest rise and fall in the rhythm of innocent dreams. Daud didn't speak either, but he sat by the door all night, shotgun on his lap. By morning, the entire village knew. Men passed by and stared. A stone was thrown at the warehouse. "Zora!" cried when it shattered the window. Noor stood up then. Her voice cracked, but her spine was straight. "We'll go," she told Dodd. "You've done more than enough, but I won't bring this fire to your door." Dodd didn't answer. He looked at her, really looked. Then he did something strange. He walked out, whistled for his mare, and came back with a rope. He began tying down sacks of grain and dry bread into 2 satchels. Noor watched, confused. "You're not staying?" she asked. "I'm coming with you," he said simply. And just like that, a widow, her child, and the warehouse keeper disappeared from the village before the sun reached its peak. But what they didn't know was that Rehmat Gul had already sent word ahead to the very men who killed Noor's husband. The desert was long. The road ahead had blood in its dust. And Daud had secrets of his own that even Noor could not have imagined. They crossed 3 rivers and a dying town before the horse gave out. The desert was cruel and the road unmarked, but Daud seemed to know where to go. Noor didn't ask questions. She carried Zora on her back when the child's feet blistered, and when they rested under thorn trees, she would hum lullabies from her childhood, broken, tuneless, but full of memory. Zora's head would rest on her chest and the world would quiet, just for a while. Daud was not a man of many words, but he watched over them like a shadow that did not ask for thanks. He slept with one eye open and one hand on his knife. Noor had seen men pretend to be kind. She'd seen how it ended. But Daud, he wasn't pretending. He didn't touch her, didn't ask for anything. Even when she fell ill near the salt plains and vomited out her insides with fever, he crushed neem leaves with his own hands and made her drink. When she wept in her sleep, he looked away, but stayed close. They reached the edge of the mountain ridge after 8 days. A small camp nestled in the valley below, a place Daud called Choti Wadi. He said his mother once lived here before the war swallowed the men. Now only women and orphans remained. Noor didn't believe such a place could exist, but it did. Women in simple cotton dresses stirred pots over open fires. Children ran barefoot chasing chickens. Old men, mostly blind, played wooden flutes under the trees. And no one asked her who she was. No one stared at her child. They were taken in. Daud was given a hut to himself. Noor and Zora got a corner in the widow's quarters. It wasn't much, but it was clean, quiet, safe. Weeks passed. Zora began to laugh again. And Noor found her hands remembering things she had forgotten. How to grind millet, how to braid another woman's hair, how to smile without looking over her shoulder. But it was also in these quiet days that she began to see Daud for what he truly was. Not just a man who offered shelter, but a man hiding something beneath the silence of his eyes. One night she found him sitting alone by the stream. His coat was off, his sleeves rolled up, and there were fresh scars on his arms, old lash marks that hadn't faded. She stepped forward. "You don't sleep," she said. He didn't answer right away. "I was once like Rehmat," he finally said. Noor stiffened. "I was born into a house where women were whipped for laughing too loud. My sister ran away, once. They caught her, shaved her head, and made her beg for forgiveness in the village square. I was 16 then. I threw stones at her too. I thought I was saving honor." Noor's breath caught in her throat. He looked up at her. "When my mother died, I left. Took nothing, just shame. And it's lived in me ever since. That's why I knew what Rehmat would do. Men like that don't forget insult. They wait. They strike." "Why did you help me?" she asked, voice barely a whisper. "Because no one helped my sister," he said. And that was the first time she saw his eyes glisten. He wiped them quickly, turned away. But fate was not done testing them. That very night, a rider arrived at the camp. A boy of no more than 17, bleeding from the leg, collapsed at the gate. When they brought him in, Daud's face darkened. The boy gasped for breath and clutched Daud's shirt. "They're coming," he rasped. 3 men, black turbans, guns. One of them said, "He's looking for the widow and her child." Noor went cold. Daud stood. I'll take them away again, Noor said. Zora and I will vanish. No one else should suffer because of us. But Daud shook his head. No. This time, they'll come to me. He pulled out a gun Noor had never seen before, wrapped in oilcloth, buried under the floor. It was old, but deadly. She stared at it, stunned. You were a soldier, she whispered. He nodded. In a war that never ended inside me. The women were told to hide in the granary that night. Zora clung to her mother's leg, silent, but wide-eyed. Noor watched from the cracks in the wall as Daud walked out into the open courtyard with nothing but the moonlight above him. 3 horses arrived. She recognized the man in front. Ramat Gul. Behind him, 2 mercenaries, men with the look of jackals, scarred, sharp-eyed, armed. Ramat dismounted and smirked. So this is where you ran, with my sister, like a thief in the night. She's not yours, Daud said calmly, and she never was. Ramat laughed. You think you can stop me? Daud raised the gun. Try me. What happened next was chaos. One of the mercenaries fired first. A shot tore through Daud's side, but he didn't fall. He fired back, hit one of them square in the chest. Women screamed. Children scattered. The second gunman aimed for the granary, thinking the girl was there. Noor didn't wait. She burst from hiding with a sickle in her hand. And in that moment, just as the second gunman raised his weapon, Zora ran into the courtyard calling out, Ami! Ramat turned to aim at her. Noor threw herself in front of her daughter. But the shot never came, because Daud had stepped between them, and the bullet meant for Zora buried itself in his chest. Ramat ran. The remaining mercenary tried to flee, but was caught by the village boys with sticks and stones. The fight was over. But Daud lay bleeding on the stone. Noor held his head in her lap. Why? Why would you do this? He smiled, blood on his lips, because some children deserve to grow up with better stories. His breath slowed and stopped. Noor screamed, not like a woman, but like the desert itself had lost its only shelter. They buried Daud under the neem tree at the edge of Choti Wadi, the same kind of tree Noor had buried her husband's shoes beneath. But this time, there was a body. This time, the grave was dug not by strangers, but by hands that trembled with grief and honor. Noor sat beside the fresh soil long after the others had returned to the village. Zora fell asleep in her lap, her small arms wrapped tightly around her mother's waist, as if fearing she too might vanish. The women of the village lit clay, lamps around the hut that night, not just for mourning, but for protection. Everyone knew Ramat had escaped. Everyone knew he would come again. But something had shifted. Daud's sacrifice had burned itself into the hearts of those who watched him bleed for a woman, not his wife, a child, not his daughter. No one asked questions anymore. No one whispered. Noor was no longer a burden. She was a widow of 2 men, one who died trying to keep her, and one who died trying to save her. But peace is a fragile bird in the desert. It does not perch for long. 3 nights after the burial, an old shepherd came limping into the village. He had a bruised face and fear in his voice. He said he had seen Ramat Gul in the pass, speaking to the chief of a rogue caravan clan. He had promised gold in exchange for the woman and the child. Noor listened from the shadows, her hands clenched. Her eyes, once soft with sorrow, now burned with something else, something deeper than grief. She walked to the widow's hut and asked for a sewing needle and a bowl of crushed glass. The women gasped. "What are you doing, sister?" one asked. But Noor said only this: "He took my first life. He won't take my second." She tore the hem of her old dupatta, stitched the glass into its folds, and tied it around her waist like a belt. Then she wrote a note. Just 5 words. I will meet you alone. She sent it with the shepherd, who trembled as he held it. That night, under the red moon, Noor left the camp. She didn't tell Zora. She only kissed her forehead, tucked a wooden toy into her small hands, and whispered, "If I don't come back, remember this, you are no man's shame." The mountain pass was quiet. Only the wind whispered over the rocks. Noor walked with a lantern and the shadow of Daud at her back. She had no weapon but the sickle tucked beneath her shawl and the fire in her chest. Remat was already there. He sat on a rock, smirking. "So you came," he said. "Without your dead savior this time." "I came because I know you," Noor said, voice steady. "You never kill with your own hands. You let others do the sin, while you polish your honor." Remat stood, circling her. "You're brave. Now, you weren't so brave when Abba told me to raise you after he died." "You never raised me," she said. "You kept me like cattle in the back of the house." He laughed. "You think wearing glass makes you a warrior? You're still just a woman. I can sell you to the next tribe and they won't even ask your name." She didn't flinch. She took one step closer. And then she did the unexpected. She dropped to her knees. "I came to beg," she said softly. Remat stopped, confused. "For what?" He spat. "For your forgiveness," she said, lowering her eyes. "For making you run. For making you lose face. For hiding behind another man." He smiled, proud, arrogant. "That's better," he said. "Maybe there's hope for you after. All. Come, kiss my feet." Noor crawled forward. The wind howled through the canyon. Her fingers touched the dust near his boots. And then she whispered, "This is for every daughter you would have sold." She pulled the sickle from beneath her shawl and slashed his leg. Remat screamed, fell backward. But she didn't stop there. She rose, grabbed her dupatta by both ends, and wrapped it around his throat. The glass inside cut deep. He thrashed. He cursed. He clawed at her wrists. But she held on, long enough to see his eyes widen with fear, not because she was killing him, but because he finally saw her as more than a burden. He saw her as the woman who had survived everything he thought would destroy her. When he went still, she let go. Her hands bled. Her face was streaked with dust and sweat, but her spine was straight. She turned and walked away, never once looking back. The shepherd met her at the edge of the valley. He said nothing, just bowed. When she returned to Choti Wadi, the village rose. They saw the blood. They saw the bruises, but they didn't ask. An old woman took her hand, kissed it. "You are one of us now," she said. Noor wept then, not from pain, but from release. Later that week, she lit a lamp at Daud's grave. "I kept my promise," she whispered. "She is safe." And as the wind passed through the neem leaves, something like peace settled over the earth. But in the corner of the widow's hut, Zora sat holding the wooden toy and asked one question. Ammi. Who was he really? Noor closed her eyes and said, "He was a man who died with no family, so that we could live like we had one." Monsoon came late that year. The skies over Choti Wadi darkened for days before they wept. When the first raindrops kissed the cracked soil, the children screamed with joy. Pots were turned upward, and women danced barefoot in the wet earth, their hair loose like the days of their girlhood. Noor stood at the edge of the gathering, her palms open, her eyes raised. But her smile was faint, quiet, the kind that carries weight. Zora was 7 now. She no longer clung to her mother's leg. She ran with the other children, wild and bright, her laughter like broken pearls falling into the puddles. But every night before sleep, she still asked Noor to tell her a story. Not a fairy tale, not about jinns or princes, but about Daud. "Was he your husband?" she asked one night, her voice muffled under the blanket. Noor stared at the oil lamp. "No," she said, "but he died for us." "Yes." "Then why didn't you marry him?" Noor's throat tightened. "Because some men come not to stay, but to return what the world stole from us." Zora blinked, puzzled. "I don't understand." "You will," Noor whispered, brushing her daughter's hair back. "One day when you see someone hurting, and instead of asking, 'Why should I care?' you say, 'Because once, someone cared for me.' That day, you'll understand Daud." Zora nodded slowly, as if tucking the words into the folds of her small heart. Time passed. Seasons changed. Noor no longer lived in the widow's quarters. She built a mudroom of her own, small, clean, with vines growing across the doorway and prayers written in charcoal on the walls. She became the midwife of the village, trusted with new life. Her hands, once shaky from fear, now brought babies into the world with steady grace. But the past does not forget its name. One morning, a stranger arrived at the edge of Choti Wadi, a boy, maybe 15. He had Daud's eyes. He carried a torn satchel, dust-covered feet, and a folded letter. Noor stood still as he approached. He handed her the letter without a word. It was from a prison far north, written by an old man, a soldier, a father. The letter said, "If this reaches you, then my son is gone. I raised him wrong, taught him how to hold a rifle, not how to hold kindness. When he left us, he carried guilt bigger than any war. He wrote to me once about a woman with fire in her eyes and a child that reminded him of his sister. He said he died once and found life again through them. If you are that woman, then I owe you my son's final piece. This boy beside you is Daud's nephew. He ran away. He needs a mother. If you have it in your heart to take one more burden, maybe this time it won't feel like one." Noor's fingers trembled as she folded the letter. The boy stared at her, silent, waiting. She turned to Zora. Her daughter smiled. "He can stay," Zora said. And just like that, their small house became 3. Noor never told the village who the boy truly was. She just said he was family, and no one questioned her again. Years later, when Zora stood tall with henna on her hands, ready to leave for a home of her own, she asked her mother one final time, "What did Daud really want in the end?" Noor smiled. "Nothing." "Then why did he do so much?" "Because he once watched someone he loved suffer and did nothing. So when he saw us, he made a choice, to be what he never had the courage to be." Zora wept, but not from sadness. That night, when the stars gathered like witnesses above the desert, Noor sat by the neem tree, now tall and flowering. She placed a hand on the grave beneath. "Zora's grown," she whispered, "and so have I." The wind rustled, a soft, low sigh. Noor closed her eyes and smiled. The neem tree bloomed wildly the following spring. Birds nested in its arms, as if drawn by the scent of old grief now softened into memory. Noor had grown quiet in her strength. Her days were full of work. She delivered babies, stitched wounds, and offered herbs to aching women. But each evening she sat beneath the tree and spoke softly to the grave below, not always in words, sometimes in silence, sometimes with her hands resting on the dry earth, as if waiting for a heartbeat that once answered her without ever touching her. But that peace did not last long. One afternoon, as she ground turmeric in a clay bowl, the new boy, Daud's nephew, burst into the courtyard with panic in his breath. "A caravan has come," he said. "They've pitched camp just outside the well. They're not traders. They ask strange questions." Noor stood at once. She dusted her hands. Her gaze narrowed. What questions? They asked about a woman with a glass-studded dupatta and a little girl named Zora. Noor's heart stopped. The past, it seemed, was not done with them. By nightfall, a tall man in foreign desert robes came to the edge of Choti Wadi. His beard was dyed with henna. His turban was wrapped like a chieftain's. He held an old scroll in his hand. On it, a tribal seal Noor hadn't seen in over a decade. It was her father's tribe, the one that had exiled her, the one that gave her to Rehmat Gul in exchange for peace with his clan. The man introduced himself in a voice full of dust and distance. I am Kazim, he said. Cousin of your blood. You are Noor bint Kalandar, are you not? Noor stood in the doorway. She didn't reply. He unfolded the scroll and read, As per tribal judgment, the blood debt remains unpaid. The man who married her is dead. The one who defied the exile is dead. Only she remains. Her daughter must return to the clan for judgment, or she must pay. Noor's eyes went black with fury. I have paid, she said. Not by our law. Then your law is blind. Kazim's mouth curled. You can run into new graves, Noor, but sooner or later, the sand always remembers the footsteps of the shamed. The villagers gathered behind her, unsure what to do. This was not a fight of swords. It was a war of names, of blood. Noor looked him in the eye. You want Zora? She said. I do not want her. The clan does. She carries shame in her blood. She carries strength in it, Noor said. She carries the silence of Daud and the scream I never released. Kazim laughed. Then speak it now, woman. And Noor did. She stepped forward, her voice cold and clear. You buried me once when you married me off like livestock. You buried me again when you turned your back after my child was born. But I am not buried anymore. I dug myself out, with my own hands. And if you ever come for her again, I will bury you, in the grave you dug for me. Kazim raised his hand, to strike her. But before he could, the boy, Daud's nephew, stepped between them. He didn't speak. He just lifted his shirt and showed the scar, the one on his back, the one from a soldier's whip long ago. I am the son of the man who died protecting her, the boy said, and I have not forgotten how to protect. Kazim faltered. A murmur went through the village. Then an old elder stepped out from the crowd. He had never spoken for Noor before, but now he did. We saw who bled for her, and who still wants her blood. We'll stand by the one who bled. Kazim's eyes burned with hate, but he knew. This battle was lost. He spat at the dust and walked away. That night, Noor sat by the neem tree again. She said nothing. She just touched the grave and whispered, You were right to leave everything behind. Then she turned to the boy and said, You stood in front of me today like a wall. Not all walls imprison. Some protect. He lowered his eyes. I only did what he would have done. No, Noor said gently. You did what he died, hoping someone would learn. The years turned softly, like pages in a book no one dared to rush. Zora became a young woman of quiet grace and quick eyes. Her laugh echoed through the fields where she tended herbs, and her steps left no dust in the house her mother built from scars. The neem tree outside had grown taller than any roof in Choti Wadi. Children hung swings from its arms, lovers carved their names into its bark, and when the wind blew just right, it whispered old names, Daud, Noor, Zora, like a prayer too, old to forget. But peace is a fragile thing in places where pride still burns under the ashes. Zora's hand had been asked for many times. Poor boys, rich men, even a school teacher from the next village who saw her once at the well and said her silence haunted him. But Noor said no to all. Not because she didn't want Zora to marry, but because she wanted her to choose. and Zora did choose. One night, she told Noor about the boy who always returned her goats without asking, who mended their broken fence when no one was watching, who never said more than 3 words, but whose eyes followed her like her father's once had followed her mother. Noor listened, her face unreadable. "He's the son of the man who tried to sell you," Zora said quietly, "but he isn't like him." Noor sat in silence. "The tribe will talk," she finally said. "They always talk," Zora replied. "But I won't be punished for someone else's blood." Noor closed her eyes and remembered. How many years had passed? How many wounds had healed crooked? She nodded. If he is kind and brave and silent when anger rises, then he is already family. But the boy's father did not agree. The man, now older but still soaked in shame and bitterness, came storming to Noor's door. "You think I will let my son marry the daughter of the woman who ruined my name?" Noor stood still. "I think," she said, "that your son is trying to save what's left of it." His hand rose in fury, but this time Zora stepped forward. Her voice didn't shake. "If you strike her," she said, "you strike me. And if you strike me, I will not cry. I will walk into your house and tell your wife what you did to my mother the night you tied her to a cart and left her outside the village gate." The man froze. "How do you—" "I know," Zora said. "We all know. But we remained silent because my mother taught me that justice sometimes waits for its own hour." The man lowered his eyes. His rage melted into something uglier, fear. Zora turned to her mother. "If I marry his son, it's not to forgive him. It's to choose a man who crawled out from the shadow of his father with clean hands." Noor smiled slowly. There it was. Strength that did not shout. Justice that did not need swords. The wedding was simple. No loud drums, no golden silk. Just the neem tree, a small fire, and 2 hands joined under the same stars that once watched Dord bleed for a stranger. That night, when the guests left and the courtyard emptied, Zora sat beside her mother one last time as a daughter. "You were never weak," she said. "You were waiting for me to be ready." Noor held her hand and whispered, "You are more than ready. You are the answer to every time I asked why I survived." Zora looked at the grave under the neem. "Do you think he would have been proud?" Noor didn't reply with words. She looked up. A breeze passed through the branches, and for a brief moment, the lantern flames danced, as if someone, somewhere, was nodding in the dark. Later that year, Zora planted a small sapling beside the grave. A second neem. "I want it to grow next to his," she said. "Like I grew next to yours." Noor wept, not from sorrow, but from the strange beauty of a world that had once left her in dust and now bloomed in her daughter's hands. Kindness returns multiplied. Justice waits in silence. And sometimes the deepest revenge is not hatred, but healing.